Venom tears the Meteor from beneath Midtown High. The sky turns red, and symbiotes spread across New York. From that moment, Spider-Man 2 barely slows down until the final battle. In the game we played, the Meteor is basically the switch that starts the ending. But during development, Insomniac had already built an unfinished operation around it in the middle of the campaign. A train, a wooded area, security forces, and a facility tied to the alien rock. And that was only one missing piece. Tony Todd recorded Venom material involving Miles wearing a symbiote. Riot reached rough encounter work. Insomniac also mapped out stories for Beetle, Carnage, and the Spider-Verse beyond the campaign. These ideas did not all belong to one finished version of the game. One survived as incomplete gameplay, one came from voice recording, some existed as rough enemy work. Others were internal plans that never became public content. So there is no secret director's cut sitting somewhere, ready to be restored. But there was clearly a larger Spider-Man 2 in development. In that version, the symbiote story began earlier, unfolded in more stages, and continued after Harry's final battle. Then Insomniac cut the back half down and reconnected what remained. So what was actually removed? How far did it get? Why did the game have to shrink? And what changed when those pieces disappeared?
The clearest place to begin is the Meteor. Development material includes an unfinished section internally called Meteor. It appears to belong around the middle of the campaign and involves a train, a wooded area, security forces, and a facility connected to the rock. We do not have a finished mission with a locked script. We do not know exactly which Spider-Man was playable, what happened inside the facility, or how many times the idea changed. But this went beyond the name on a planning board. Insomniac had started building gameplay around the Meteor. That is very different from the role it has in the released game. There, Venom pulls the Meteor from beneath Midtown High, uses it to spread the symbiote across New York, and sends the story straight into its final crisis. The Meteor matters, but mainly because it lets Venom begin the takeover.
An earlier operation could have introduced the alien threat while Peter still wore the black suit, Harry was still getting weaker, and Craven's hunt was still driving the campaign. Peter would not only be changing because of the suit, he would also be getting closer to the source of the danger, while pushing Harry, Miles, and MJ away. That could connect 3 parts of the story before the final act. Peter's growing aggression, Harry's need for the suit, and the Meteor behind the symbiote threat. Maybe the mission was cut because it did not work. We cannot know. But the job it might have served is easy to see. It could have given the alien storyline a middle before Venom turned it into the final emergency. Without that step, the symbiote threat stays mostly in the background until Venom needs the Meteor. Then it has to become a citywide invasion almost immediately.
The next clue came from Tony Todd, the voice of Venom. Todd said the final game used only about 10% of what he recorded. That number sounds enormous, but it does not mean 90% of a finished Venom campaign was deleted. Games record alternate lines, early scenes, and ideas that can disappear long before a mission becomes playable. The more useful detail is that Todd said he recorded material involving Miles wearing a symbiote. We do not know how large that idea was. It could have been one scene, a short sequence, or part of a longer direction that never survived. There was no evidence of a complete Miles symbiote campaign sitting unfinished somewhere. What the recording does show is that Insomniac considered letting the symbiote reach beyond Peter and Harry.
In the released game, Miles is the person who pulls Peter back. He refuses to give up on him, fights through the suit's influence, and helps Peter remove it. Once Peter is free, Miles mostly returns to helping stop the next crisis. If the symbiote later reached Miles, Peter would have to face the same danger from the other side. He would see the anger and excuses that controlled him now taking hold of the person who saved him. Miles already carries rage toward Martin Lee and grief over his father, so the suit would have something personal to use. That would do more than give Miles a darker costume. It could keep Peter's black suit mistake alive after Peter removed it. The damage would pass from one Spider-Man to the other,
and Peter would have to deal with a problem he helped bring into both of their lives. That is as far as the evidence goes. It doesn't give us a complete missing storyline, but it does show that Insomniac considered letting Peter's corruption affect the story for longer.
Riot appears in a different kind of unfinished work. Development material includes assets and rough encounter work tied to the Life Foundation symbiotes, with Riot leaving the clearest footprint. Other familiar names appear as well, but there is no basis for claiming that 4 completed boss fights were ready to ship. The rough work still tells us what Insomniac was considering. In the final game, Venom's army is mostly made up of combat types rather than individual villains. The invasion becomes dangerous very quickly, but there are few named enemies between Venom's arrival and the final battle. A character like Riot could have broken that takeover into stages. Venom appears, a stronger symbiote takes control of one part of the city, Peter and Miles learn how the threat is changing. New fights build toward Venom himself. That structure would give the invasion more steps and more distinct encounters. It would also demand more missions, more performances, and more development time. Maybe those fights never came together, but they show that Venom's invasion once had more pieces than the final game kept.
The larger plan did not stop when Peter and Miles saved Harry. Internal material laid out a Beetle villain arc around Janice Lincoln. The outline included an introduction, a reveal, an ambush, a construction sequence, a convoy, and a boss encounter. Those labels do not mean 6 polished missions were complete, but Beetle had moved beyond a character name on a wish list. Someone had started working out how her story could unfold. A separate roadmap also listed concepts connected to Beetle, Carnage, and the Spider-Verse. None of them was publicly promised. Still, they match threads the released game leaves open. Cletus Cassidy escapes with a symbiote during the Flame storyline. The Spider-Bot quest ends with a multiverse tease. These plans matter because they offered somewhere else for unfinished ideas to go.
Carnage did not need to be pushed into Harry's ending if his story could continue later. Beetle could have her own arc instead of competing for campaign time with Kraven and Venom. The Spider-Verse setup could lead to a separate story instead of remaining a final tease. By October 2024, Insomniac said it had no additional story content planned for Spider-Man 2. The studio did not publicly explain what happened to every internal idea, and there is no solid evidence that the ransomware attack caused those plans to disappear. So the sequel became smaller in 2 places. Its main campaign lost material while the back half was being rebuilt, and the stories once considered for after the credits never reached players either. The next question is who made the cuts? Online, the answer is often reduced to one line: Sony rushed the game. What creative director Brian Intihar described after release was more complicated. He said the team reached a point where the back half of Spider-Man 2 was not going to meet the quality they wanted. Sony's producers could see the problem. Insomniac's own project leadership saw it too. Intihar then had to work out what could be removed, whether those cuts damaged the core of the game, and how the remaining pieces could be connected without creating another huge wave of unfinished work. He compared the process to shaving down puzzle pieces until they fit together again. That is more serious than one side mission being canceled. Every game abandons ideas, and some of the material in this video may have disappeared early. But Intihar was describing a point where the back half as a whole had become a production problem. Insomniac had to reduce it and rebuild the connections between what survived. His account does not say that Sony rejected a requested delay, selected the Venom missions to remove, or personally chose which characters lost content. Sony was part of the production decision, but Insomniac's own leadership agreed that the problem was real, and the creative cutting happened inside the studio. The simpler explanation is that Spider-Man 2 had grown beyond what the team could finish at the same quality bar. Insomniac kept the pieces it could bring to release and removed or compressed the rest. That is how a game can feel polished and still move too quickly. The individual scenes can work. The distance between them can disappear. Now put those missing pieces beside the released campaign. Kraven's story has a clear rise. His hunters arrive early, his targets shape the campaign. The black suit changes the way Peter fights him. And when Venom kills Kraven, one villain story ends in one of the game's strongest scenes.
The problem is what has to happen immediately afterward. Harry has to become Venom. The story has to establish the bond between Harry and the symbiote, send Venom after the Meteor, spread the symbiote across New York, create Scream, push Peter toward anti-Venom, and reach the final battle. The game still hits those major moments, but it has very little time between them. Harry feels that speed more than anyone. The first half carefully rebuilds his friendship with Peter through their history, Coney Island, and the Emily May Foundation. Then Peter keeps the suit, Harry's health collapses, his anger rises, he bonds with the symbiote, kills Kraven, attacks the city, and reaches the finale in rapid succession. None of those events is impossible to follow. The missing part is the change between them. Harry barely has time to become Venom before the game is already asking him to finish Venom's story. Peter's side moves just as quickly. He brutalizes Kraven, frightens MJ, shuts Miles out, and refuses to return the thing keeping Harry alive. Miles forces the suit off him. But before Peter can spend much time facing those choices, Harry becomes the next emergency, and Peter is pushed back into saving the city. MJ's Scream fight gives some of that damage a place to surface. Martin Lee's sacrifice and anti-Venom give Peter a way to fight the invasion. Both are effective moments. They also have to handle emotional and practical problems while the story is already moving toward its ending.
This is where the unfinished material starts to matter. It shows what may once have sat between those major beats. The Meteor operation could have introduced the alien danger before Venom took over the campaign. The Miles recording could have kept the symbiote's effect alive after Peter removed the suit. Riot and the other named symbiotes could have given the invasion more stages. The planned stories after the campaign could have carried Beetle, Carnage, and the Spider-Verse without forcing every open thread into Harry's ending. Remove all of that, and the released game still reaches the same destinations. Peter loses control. Miles saves him. Harry becomes Venom. MJ becomes Scream. Peter gains anti-Venom. Both Spider-Men save Harry. What changes is the road between those moments. Not automatically. Spider-Man 2 is already carrying 2 playable Spider-Men, Kraven's Hunt, Harry's Return, Peter's black suit, Venom, a larger New York, faster traversal, and much bigger set pieces. Every additional mission needs writing, performance, design, animation, testing, and story time. If the campaign stayed the same length, adding the Meteor operation, a Miles-symbiote storyline, Riot, and more named enemies could make the ending even harder to control. Some of these ideas may have been removed because they were not working. Some may have belonged to older versions of the story. Others may never have moved far beyond early planning. That is normal in game development. Restoring every abandoned file is not the answer. The useful part is seeing the structure Insomniac was reaching for, an alien threat that started earlier, developed through more characters and encounters, and continued beyond one campaign ending. For that version to work, Spider-Man 2 would have needed more time, fewer competing ideas, or a post-launch plan that actually reached players. The version Insomniac could finish was the smaller one, so the larger plan was reduced until the remaining game could ship. By release, the Meteor was no longer the center of a mid-game operation. It became the switch for Venom's final takeover. Miles remained the person who saved Peter from the symbiote, not another person Peter might have needed to save from it. Riot and the Life Foundation work did not become a larger chain of named enemies. Beetle, Carnage, and Spider-Verse plans did not become the continuation after the credits. And when the back half stopped meeting the required quality, Insomniac cut it down and joined the surviving pieces together. There was no single finished alternate Spider-Man 2 with every mission, boss, performance, and expansion ready to go. The larger game existed in pieces at different stages, and some of those pieces may never have worked. But it was not imaginary. The material shows a sequel where the symbiote story began earlier. Venom's invasion had more steps. Both Spider-Men could be pulled deeper into the same conflict, and New York's story continued after Harry was saved. The game we received is polished, fast, and full of excellent moments. The version Insomniac explored was larger, messier, and much harder to finish. What it lost was not one hidden masterpiece.
it lost the missions, encounters, and follow-up stories that might have connected Peter's fall to Venom's invasion before the credits arrived. So, did cutting that material save Spider-Man 2 from collapsing under its own size? Or did it cut away the middle that Venom's story needed?